This video is going to serve as an introduction to some basic concepts of communication and to this course in general. And in the process, one kind of question is going to guide the early things we're going to be talking about. And it's simple. It's what are all the things we have to get right for even basic interpersonal communication to work? And I mean basic, just getting our message from person A to person B. What is it? What are all the things that have to happen for that to take place? So, to do that, first, I'm going to define communication. You'll find that if you have 10 different instructors, you're going to often have 10 different definitions of communication. So, of course, mine's the best, but just keep that in mind that you'll encounter different versions in different classes. But there are a couple things there are a couple of reasons I really do like this one and think I can make a good argument for it. First, the fact that it's a process, it's ongoing. It's hard to tell when it starts and stops. Like if I have a course where students are presenting, I tell them that their presentation starts the second they walk in the room. They give a lot of cues to their confidence or their attitude toward the presentation. Same if you walk into an interview. Before you even say a word, the other person's going to be inferring certain things about you and you about them before they even say a word. So it's good to keep in mind that this is a very ongoing kind of process that doesn't have obvious starts and stops. The other part of this definition that I really want you to take away is that the idea of stimulating meaning, because it sets a high bar for communication. It means we have done nothing except babble and talk on and on unless we have stimulated the desired meaning in another person's mind. So if you think about it, a lot of people talk, but how often do we really stimulate the desired meaning in another person's mind? That's the standard that we want to keep in mind. This is why there have been times where you've argued for minutes or maybe hours with someone and it didn't really resolve anything because the meaning that you wanted to stimulate didn't make it into the other person's mind. So this course in part will talk a lot about how to get that meaning into someone else's mind. With that in mind, I want to talk about a couple other things about meanings. First, when we talk, we're communicating two things. We're first the content of our message, the actual verbal content, the words we're using. That's kind of the content we're trying to say. But the relational meaning also is important. That is what we communicate more non-verbally. We can communicate it verbally, but it typically is nonverbal, and that's it's how we convey to others what we actually think about them. So if I deny a request to a coworker and I'm like, no, I can't do it. I'm sorry, I can't do it. I wish I could. And to another coworker, I'm like, nope, can't do it. Sorry. The words change a little bit, but so did the attitude there. So the content was largely similar, though. If you back up and look at it, it was no, I can't do it. But relationally, the way I said that, the first one, I was a lot more sympathetic to what the person was asking for. The second one, indifferent. I didn't care. So we can communicate both content and relational meanings anytime we're communicating. That's important to keep in mind. So this is a model that gets taught in most communication courses, at least introductory ones at the beginning. And I used to take it for granted, but there are actually a lot of interesting things we can take away from it. And they get at that question I posed at the beginning of this video. What are all the things that have to go right? Here are all the things that have to go right. So let me walk you through the parts of the process. First, we have a sender, these are two individuals. This is individual A, this is individual B. I'm talking about interpersonal communication. If we were talking about group communication, we could add a bunch of other people to it, but it'd be an uglier diagram. So let's just focus on two people. Each person simultaneously is a sender and receiver. Even in a large lecture class, if I'm talking to students, I'm still receiving messages about how into the content they are or how not into the content they are. So we each function as a sender and receiver. And it's not listed in the model, but when we send messages, we encode. E-N-C-O-D-E. E-N-C-O-D-E. We encode, which means we take the thoughts in our head and we try to package them into the appropriate verbal and nonverbal message. So we encode our thoughts into a message that includes both verbal and nonverbal content relational dimensions that we try to send through a channel. And a channel is simply the medium we use. So it could be face to face. We could use telephone as a channel. Obviously, cell phones are an important channel. And depending on whether you use messaging or actual voice calling or video calling, Skyping, that kind of thing, those are all different channels. And we might have to take those channels into account to get our message to the receiver in the right way. In other words, the way we communicate our message may change depending on the channel we're using. Often it should change. We shouldn't assume that the same message is going to work the same way through every single different channel. Then the receiver on their end has to take that message and decode it. So D-E-C-O-D-E. And that is taking the verbal and nonverbal message you gave them and trying to understand what it means, trying to get the right meaning out of it. So hopefully the meaning they take from it is the meaning you intended for them to take from it. And if not, that's a problem. So again, sender encodes message that goes through a certain channel, and the receiver on their end decodes it. And this happens really fast. Often, we're usually typically not thinking about it unless we really consciously try to stop and think about, how do I say this, or what are they saying? But often it happens automatically, unconsciously. We just do it, and we're constantly, it's going both ways, simultaneously. Piece of cake, right? Well, there are also things that interfere with this process. So you see the word noise throughout here. Noise is anything that can interfere with the process of communicating. And there are two types of noise. Could be internal or external. First, external noise. External noise is really anything that physically interferes. So if sometimes when I'm teaching, someone will be cutting grass outside the window. It'll be hard to hear. There'll actually be physical noise that makes it impossible to hear. If you're communicating electronically and there's a problem with the connection, the email's down, if you're doing a video call and the video freezes or whatever, so that'll do it. If your text doesn't go through, if your text gets changed and garbled in the transmission, those are all types of external noise. Internal noise is happening within us, and that could be anything from our mood, our emotion. Could be we're hungry, could be we're distracted, could be we just don't want to talk, could be we don't like the person, could be all those things. Those are all internal sources of noise that could interfere with the process. So those are the basic parts of the model. Now you see the words field of experience over here. I would prefer to use the term frame of reference. So I stole this diagram. That's why it doesn't say frame of reference. So frame of reference is what I'd prefer you to think of this as. It's a little easier than field of experience. Frame of reference. And that's all the experiences that we've encountered up until the time we're sending the message that color how we look at the world, that color how we take meaning and put it into a message and what channel we choose to use. So it's really anything that, from our life experience that colors how we go through this process. So it could be our personality, it could be other, it could be just the lessons we've learned. So if you want to send the message that you're angry to someone, people will do it in different ways. Some will be very aggressive about it. Some will be very passive. Some won't do it at all. And that's partly through their frame of reference. They just have different ways. They've learned that there are different, that there's a way to send a certain message, and they've learned it through their, through their life experiences. So, and that colors creates their frame of reference, which colors how this works. So, okay, That's all that has to happen for you to communicate well. You have to successfully encode the message, the meaning, the idea into the right kind of message, verbally and non-verbally, send it through the right channel, overcome all kinds of sources of noise, and the person on the other end has to decode it in the way that you wanted them to. And then their response has to give you a sense that, okay, decoding was successful and the way you wanted it to happen. That's it. That's all that has to happen. Piece of cake. Well, actually, you can see all the things that could go wrong with this process. And that explains why, in my estimation, we're surprised when it goes bad, but often we should be surprised when it goes well, because there's just so much that could go wrong. So I'm going to go into more detail throughout the semester on a lot of these things. And this is kind of what I just said. Many things have to happen for communication to be successful. So where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? I want to talk a little bit, very briefly, about how the course is organized. You're not going to have to necessarily remember a lot of big concepts from this map, but this is just to help you understand where we're going. So early in the semester, I'm going to talk about cognitive and emotional competence. Cognitive means our thoughts. There are a lot of ways our thoughts can help us become better communicators or worse communicators. So when I say cognitive competence, I mean, okay, do we perceive situations accurately? Do we get the right information out of the situation? And then do we do that encoding effectively? Can we put our thoughts into words effectively? Emotional competence means, can we handle our emotions or others' emotions in the process? Emotions can be a huge source of noise that can really impair our ability to communicate well. So those are something we need to manage. And then others' emotions also are going to impair their ability to understand what we're trying to say or to get the meaning that we're trying to convey. So emotions are a huge part of this whole process. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about cognitive and emotional competence, perception, personality, because personality colors these things. So we're going to talk a lot about these things early in the semester. And then once we do that, once we have some foundational kinds of things, we'll talk about different types of skills that we can use to handle others. And that sounds so manipulative. I don't mean it necessarily that way, but just communicate well with others, navigate certain types of situations. Can we influence others? We have to handle ourselves too. We have to handle our emotions and our cognitive abilities and lack of abilities sometimes. And we always have to fit the situation. We're always communicating in a context, which is something I left out of that model earlier, but communication happens in a certain context. So so you should go back and include it in the model. So what I mean by that is, and it wasn't listed in the diagram, but like communicating in a bar setting versus a church setting are going to be two very different things. So is communicating in a classroom. So is communicating in the workplace. So the context we're in and the situation that's going on, those are things that are going to influence how we communicate with others. So it's important to keep that in mind and be sensitive to that. So this is where, okay, we have to have the cognitive emotional competence to see what the situation is, to manage ourselves, to kind of manage others, and using different types of skills that we're going to talk about. And then we're going to talk about how to accomplish different types of goals later in the semester. Developing good relationships, being able to provide support to others who need support, influencing others, handling conflict, those types of things. Important outcomes that we need to do on a daily basis that are rooted in how well we can meet the needs of a situation, the communication needs of a situation, how we can handle others, handle ourselves, using skills that are based in our cognitive emotional competence. So you don't need to necessarily memorize this model in a way to explain it all back to me. Just know some of the key parts of it, and we'll return to it throughout the semester, because I think if you can kind of do these kinds of things, if you can get the front half, then it'll help you with the back half. So that's going to be a big goal of this course.